So I always feel privileged when I get to speak one-on-one in this casual setting with a member of our AIA program. The original artist program in residence here at A&H died in like 1959. Is that correct, Danny? Mm-hmm. Okay. That was with the death of Andre Smith. But this historical program was resurrected in 2012, and since then has become once again the embodiment of Andre's original vision and intent for the institution. So tonight we have the pleasure of hearing from one of our current 2021-22 AIA's award recipient, artist MJ Torrecampo. There you go. Give a little round of applause for MJ. Yeah. So MJ was born in the Philippines, and in 2020 she received her Master of Fine Arts degree in painting from the New York Academy of Art in New York City. She received her Bachelor of Fine Arts in painting with a minor in art history from the University of Central Florida here in Orlando. That was in 2014, correct? All right, ready?
Yeah.
Gonna get into this, okay. So, okay, so because your family plays such an important role in the subject matter of your recent work, can you start by giving us a basic backstory or a brief family history?
Well, my family's from the Philippines. We moved here to the States when I was 9. We moved to Illinois and lived there for 3 years. So we're pretty much culturally Filipino, which is, I would say, a little bit more Western in terms of culture than Eastern. But a lot of, I don't know how familiar with Filipino culture, but it's really like, should I hold this closer to my mouth?
Yeah, you're good. Yeah.
I don't know how familiar you are with Filipino culture, but it's very family oriented. Like I didn't live out of my family's until I graduated from undergrad. So that was like 22 by then. We moved to Florida because my sister got married here, and my mom, who makes decisions, was tired of living in Illinois and the cold weather. So we all moved to Florida when I was 12.
Okay.
And we've all kind of just joined back together in Florida after a few years of kind of living apart from home.
So you had said to me that you originally were thinking of studying mechanical engineering, is that correct?
Yeah, that was my original major at UCF.
Your original major at UCF was mechanical engineering, and then you had a professor that was kind of very passionately speaking about art history.
Yeah.
And mainly 13th century art, correct? I mean,
no.
Pre-Renaissance art, or is it just in general?
No, it was an overall overview of
survey
Western,
class?
Yeah, survey of Western art history. That was, shout out to Elenia if she is somewhere out in the world. Yeah, my first semester at UCF happened to be Elenia's first semester teaching at UCF.
Wow, isn't that fortunate, right?
Yeah.
Look at that.
And I had taken it as an elective, just for fun.
Right.
I don't know why art history sounded fun at that point. Within all my mechanical engineering classes, and I was like, oh, this is great. I love the Nike Sampras was my favorite sculpture at that. It's probably still one of my favorite sculptures today. But the way that she talked about
that's one of my director's favorite pieces as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw that. Is it at the Louvre?
The Louvre, yeah.
Yeah, I saw that when I was
right at the
France
top of the staircase, right?
A few years ago, and I was like,
it's awe-inspiring. It is, absolutely. Yeah.
In the picture. So.
Well, that's interesting.
So after that, I took drawing 1 and then basically double majored with art and engineering until I couldn't. So.
Awesome. Okay.
So you got to pick one eventually.
Right. So talk about your affinity for pre-Renaissance framing devices prior to the development of linear perspective. So no, but really, it was wonderful when we were talking in the studio because it makes a lot of sense with the work we're going to get into next.
Yeah.
About how, I'm going to show examples in a second of what we're talking about, but it really does give a real insight into your work as far as how figures could be in different groupings. Mm-hmm. The hierarchy of the groupings depends on the size of the figures in the painting, not necessarily on the perspective of the painting. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So this is something that you brought up, and I was like, oh, that's really interesting that you were aware of the fact that that mechanical device, of the size of the figures and all that stuff. So is this something that you were kind of grasped in that woman's class that you're talking about?
No, I would say that's a later development, because it started when I kind of stopped using photography as a reference.
Right,
and,
right.
And like painting images from memory. And I think I talked about this when I would like think of like previous thoughts that would come up in my head. You would see them from like a slightly higher vantage point, not necessarily like your, you know, like how I'm seeing this now. If I would think about tonight again, you can kind of scan through the whole thing.
Right,
and you're not just stuck in this like I'm looking at you perspective.
Right, that elevated perspective, which we'll get into in a second.
Yeah,
right,
so that was kind of like the start of the perspective shift. So I don't want to.
But it's interesting because when I started looking at you know these icons of 13th century, 14th century, you know, Italian art, it is amazing because you do a similar thing with these groupings of figures based on size, right?
Yeah.
It's not necessarily where they're giving you the proper perspective, but a lot of times with this kind of art, the person who paid for the painting would be shown in the foreground. So they would be, people would know that, oh, that's so-and-so, so he's important. He's more important than Christ, who's getting whipped in the background. No, it's really interesting how they structured the hierarchy of these paintings.
Well, it depends. Usually when they have the patrons of the paintings, I think they're like tiny humans. But I'm going to give a shout out to that one on graphic novels instead of pre-Raphael or like pre-Renaissance.
Right, and we mentioned, I do mention graphic novels in here later. So this is something where, but it is something where when we talked about it in your studio, you were talking about this kind of love for that Italian art that came from that period of before linear perspective was
but
constructed.
I think that's like kind of in reverse. Like I was already sort of doing this work, and then, you know, after learning how to properly draw figures or whatever in your education, you kind of then go back and realize how like pre-Renaissance or like 14th century Italian was like sort of similar to what we're doing now, where you're not using the linear perspective because it was before I figured it out. So it's like people are showing up multiple times because it's like things are happening.
Interesting.
So there isn't that like one timeline or singular event situation. And things are broken up by like, you know, the arches and kind of like the triptychs, of course, from Catholic imagery.
Right. This for me was the meat of it. Was this feeling of ascension, right? This kind of, and I don't mean in a religious way. I mean in this kind of seeing things from this elevated perspective, seeing things from this kind of higher position or higher, you know. And it was interesting because when I looked up ascend, I would have never thought that I found that definition of ascend. This to me related to something you were dealing with your family subject matter, but that could be something we could talk about later. You know, to go back to the beginning, because you said you had departed from you were kind of based on an individual subject matter, and then you departed, and then you came back to your family as a subject matter. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was doing mostly kind of like images of figures and bars, or like kind of this finding a community, or you know, of course I was in New York for grad school, so it was a lot of humans all in one place, and you're trying to figure out like who are your people, even if you're all hanging out and it looks like you've got this gigantic community. Not everyone is really like, you know, you're not vibing with everyone. Right.
Interesting. So you were trying to sort that out in a painting.
Yeah. So
that's pretty bold. Right.
You have these groups, but then you have smaller groups, and then like you have like every person's relationship to how kind of the group is set up.
So I was thinking, we'll get through this quickly, but it is amazing how when I thought of that and dealing this progression from Renaissance art on, you know, it was always something where they wanted you, or that the painter at that time wanted you to look up at this unattainable thing, right? This kind of like divine or whatever, you know, Greek, Roman, whatever it was, Christian. But then, you know, here's another one which I thought was interesting because you know, you use these kind of wonderful curved kind of settings in your work, But you really flip it on your head and you kind of come back to the point where you're the ascended thing and you're looking down at these very, what could be called mundane or kind of activities, And so this painting here, is this when you're talking about trying to work out those interpersonal relationships, is this the time and the setting in New York when this is going on?
This one was a little bit after that, since this is a family. The family stuff came like not after grad school, but during quarantine, I guess is the time period now. So this one, I've done a lot of dinner or table as a central thing, and then
Right.
the figures kind of laid around it. And there's kind of two artists that I look to for that. It's Bernard, which is I guess novice is the movement that he belongs in. And then Nicole Eisenman, who does a lot of there's the central fixture of the table and then the relationships that happen around it. So that's kind of what I was thinking of, where all the I guess action is happening in the extremities of the image, and
Yeah.
it's a single event in the middle.
Well, it's funny, I was talking to somebody on staff today about the cultural signifier that food is, and it's even more of a cultural signifier than art or anything. This is the one thing we absolutely, and you can really judge a culture by the way they regard the making of food and the making of time for family to sit around a table. And so there is these, it almost is kind of like this wonderful feeling of, it's kind of like I want to flip the divine thing on its head, but you are seeing something really wonderful out of this kind of coming together in this setting. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Here, let's go. So this is one of your more recent pieces, right?
Yes.
Yeah. This is one of the reasons I put that kind of fresco thing in the back, because you have these wonderful curved settings that little figures take place in. There's all these kind of interactions with these different groups of figures. But there is this kind of wonderful hierarchy too, based on size, not based on perspective. And so why don't you tell us the evolution of something like this? This is more of your recent work, right?
Yeah. Well, this one started, I don't know if you have the other one.
I do. I'm wondering if I can't go back to it though.
The other one went first.
Oh, the other one went first. Okay, this.
The one with the outside.
Yeah, this one. Yeah, hopefully I'll be able to go back.
This is when things
there you go. I found out how to go back.
Availability becomes handy, because I had two of similar, the same shaped canvas or stretchers that I already had.
Okay.
From years and years ago. So I'm just trying to go through the stretchers, and I'm thinking of a theme that I could do, kind of like a diptych or kind of two similar scenarios.
Okay.
So that's how I decided to make one where my dad is kind of the main character of this one, and then my mom's the main character of the other one.
Right.
And have that indoor.
Oh, I see. I didn't even know. I didn't even pick that up when you said that.
So that indoor outdoor kind of difference.
My thing is being so squirrely. Okay. So here's what's the name of this painting again?
It's called Inner World.
Okay, and Inner World, this is the inside version of the outside. Okay, right. So this is your mom.
Yes.
Right, okay. And then the outside version, that's your dad.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
If it matters, I don't know.
It does matter, yeah. So was this originally seen as a diptych, or is this something that you saw as separate?
They could be separate, they could be together, yeah.
So is this really when you embraced, because your work now kind of seems to wonderfully come to grasp with focusing on the family that you kind of, when you're talking to me of your history, you departed from for a period of time.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
So this is kind of, now that I got here in September in this residency, and this is a couple months down the line, and I've finally settled in with this kind of subject matter. And usually the paintings come from a singular, or a combination of memory or events. This one isn't exactly like a single event, but more of like a combination of like different ideas of what the different family members. So it's really that idea of like, you're still together in this one kind of, rectangle, one frame, but you're all doing kind of separate things, just being in the proximity of each other.
Right, right.
So it's kind of like, I don't know, I like to think that you're just, like if you're kind of going through this painting, that you just walk through this pathway and you really just go along down the middle.
Right, right.
And, like see what each person is doing and how they either connect like with each other or individually what they're doing.
So there's these little moments within your paintings, like the thing that your mom is holding. And they're kind of these wonderful moments within the larger framing that you have broken up. There are these reflections that take place. We spoke about this briefly in your studio. Can you elaborate on that? Your mom is holding this thing. It happens, this is not just a one-off, it happens kind of regularly in your work.
Yeah.
Where there'll be some moment within the larger scope of things that there'll be this little intimate interaction going on.
Yeah, so that's she's like holding a glass Tupperware, which might not even really make this reflection, but for the sake of this image, it doesn't matter. So it's reflecting basically like as a mirror of herself. And I think that's kind of like a moment, every time you see your own reflection, you just stop to think about like what you kind of like white noise everything around you and just kind of in your head for a second before you go back to like whatever the task was.
Right,
like, I think I talked to you about like when you walk by like car windows or something and
you
see like a brief reflection of your face that kind of like is an off like.
So it breaks. Yeah. So meanwhile, you're creating this mundane setting, but within this setting, there's these little passages that break that up. Mm-hmm. Okay, interesting, right? So was it the timing here at A&H? Was it just post-COVID or something? Like the real hard part of COVID. That caused you to reflect on like these intimate family relationships. Was that because you said it started around the same time that you began your residency here?
Yeah. Well, it's because I wasn't living like in the vicinity of my family for 6 years. So I knew after grad school that I was going to move back to Orlando because my parents are, frequenting the doctor's office.
Oh, right, yeah. Okay.
So, I want to be around for them. And
right.
So now that kind of brings up all these like after you've gone for 6 years and have to forge your own, you forge either your own identity or you're kind of bringing in all these other issues that wasn't like, especially with kind of like the American culture of like independence or certain American issues, there's kind of like these things that you think, am I more, like, are those my issues also? Are you more American? Or, I think there's always like that battle of like, if you're of different cultures,
That's interesting, yeah.
So I wish I could say that more eloquently.
No, it's funny. I went through this period when I was like, when I was a young artist, I kind of rebelled against. I thought my dad was kind of weak because he was like, I didn't understand, this kind of level of commitment to the family and going to work every day and so I was thinking, oh, this guy, and then it took me years though to understand like this quiet strength that he had, and then I was able to go back and reinvestigate that, and then it helped me come to terms with my own self. And it's interesting, right? Yeah.
And I think I'm still in that like kind of time where I'm trying to, you see your mom as your mom and not necessarily as like, or like your sister as your sister, but not as another separate adult who's doing their own thing in the world.
Right.
You don't see her, you start seeing her problems because I'm not getting close to that age.
Right.
We're always going to be, that same age difference, but like you start seeing those things and not necessarily like, she's just mom.
Right.
Seeing like, she has this, like I'm starting to feel those same stresses that maybe she's feeling.
Interesting,
I'm
right?
Sure it's tenfold because.
Sure, yeah. It's kind of a wonderful maturity in a way to not be so, like, because, when you do go back and you reinvestigate, you're like, sometimes you're thinking, oh my God, like, I'm smarter than these people, they never figured it out. And all of a sudden you realize, oh my God, they figured out so much more than I have. And that's why they're in this, I mean, it's one thing, just the act of service to your family, that kind of thing. A lot of times that's looked down upon, but, you come back to it and you're like, oh my God, this is like the foundation of what the world is built on in a way, Yeah,
and like my dad, who doesn't talk a lot, so I think like I've been painting him a lot recently, and I don't know if you also have it, but I did this like, I have some paintings, small paintings of like this exchange between him and I, and I'm just kind of like thinking of like what, like, I don't know, I guess the main question is like, are they happy kind of thing,
Interesting, yeah.
Like he's not supposed to be smoking, but he's smoking in almost all of my paintings now.
Like it's all these things going on, right? This frame within a frame, subplots, the dynamics of the family unit, the framing of film. We talked about film and storyboards, all these things that we could really elaborate on. But then you brought up this wonderful thing about your affinity also for graphic novels, And I was like, oh, that makes sense because of a lot of the way you construct your paintings, these different areas of, the different areas, like we said, of like the hierarchy within the story of a page, right? When you do a graphic novel, they're like, the story of each page has to work within the story of the larger whole,
Yeah.
And so it was funny because I thought of this, back to this, this work from early Renaissance, and I was thinking, oh my God, like this, it really is almost this breakup of a similar thing as far as, but here again, you go from transition, and this is the artist that you had mentioned, this Chris Ware, is that correct? This is somebody that you kind of gravitated towards his work, and you were mentioning how you loved it because he took that kind of something that was always meant for this kind of superhero effect, and he gravitated towards the mundane, the everyday experience, the kind of like the thing that regular humans would kind of kind of come across on their daily routines and stuff like that.
Yeah, but also like the way he composes his page, like you can even tell it with like, okay, so you start with that, top left.
Right.
Sorry, I'm like, now
Yeah.
my left and right all of a sudden. The top left, and then it's, there's a little slight confusion if you should go down or to the left. So then there's an arrow that goes in that central.
Oh, the red arrow. Okay,
yes,
I didn't even notice that. Right.
Now you know that you should go there, and then probably go there. I'm assuming. Sometimes his graphic novel's a little confusing to read, so you have to like go back and figure out which way it was supposed to go.
Right.
It's just, like,
which is kind of honest though, because
like
I almost thought like
time's not as linear in his
Right.
It would be in a regular graphic novel that you just go like
exactly
left to right, left to right, left to right. So I think there's that really like.
But it's funny, when I was in your studio, this made a lot more sense to me when I left and looked at his work, because even when I was in your studio, I wanted to spend time with your paintings because there was this vertical and left and right dynamic going on between the figures and the structure, and I wanted to spend time to kind of try to figure out that dynamic, So I could see this is like, oh, this makes sense now. He had this great quote that I found, and this is a Richard Munster quote, by the way. So he said, "We're all connected in ways we don't, and can't ever completely understand. The chain of causality that links us from the subatomic level up through the sphere of thought, and how that thought, through it apparently still arises from these interactions of particles." Like, this is really amazing for me to read this quote from a guy who had done some
basic ass cartoon shit.
Yeah, like what people
so
could
not basic.
what people could regard as basic.
I'm really like the greatest defender of Chris Ware all of a sudden.
But that's why I love it. It's really clever.
I think it's more than clever. Clever is just making it seem like it's like a gimmick.
You're right.
Yeah.
No, it's
No, it's funny.
Just
I have to
everyone
be.
watching this to go
I'm not.
read
I
building
didn't.
stories.
I didn't put this up. I didn't put this up casually. Like I had all these. I was looking at all these 13th century
Yeah.
Renaissance, and I came across this just because of the breakup of that you use with these arches and these little family, or these little groups within arches and hierarchies within. You know, you can tell the importance of somebody. Like in your work, your family, your mother and father are larger in the context than the other people in the room. You know, and that's kind of harkens back to, you know, this kind of spiritual art in a way where those figures that were given more importance would be larger in the frame than. So it is interesting. But when I saw this, I was really amazed at how it is a pretty amazing transition from that to this. You know what I mean? It's still this incredible regimented breakup, but people that know that, like people that know Chris Ware's work, would understand that. And people in the Renaissance, when they looked at, you know, the Ghent altarpiece, they would understand the hierarchy going on in that. So it was wonderful for me to see, like, oh, okay, this is kind of like your early graphic novel in a way,
Yeah.
because it's trying to tell this story, you know, and it's trying to tell it in a, you know, kind of a frame, you know, the frame being a triptych in some church or something. So no, it's wonderful. It really is wonderful. That when I was reading on this work, when I pulled it up, they said that the details were so important to Van Eyck that people would try to figure out what songs the angels were singing based on the shape of their mouths. Like he would try to give so much information in each little compartment of the thing. Like there's, you know, you can't see it on here because it's pixelated, but there's little sections where people are singing in the bottom. And the one person said, like, the people that day would almost know from seeing these choir processions and stuff like that, oh, those angels are singing that song, because he was so into detail. You know, for this quote to be given by the previous guy, I thought was like, oh, now I understand it, because it does kind of take it full circle, almost back to that metaphysical level, right? It's not just like all these things, all these wondrous events are taking place in our daily mundane days, you know. All these subatomic particles are all doing this kind of dance and all these things, and one thing's affecting another. And so, yeah, no, it's wonderful. It was wonderful that I kind of was, because of our conversation, I kind of found out about his work, and I could really see that kind of, especially like what Richard said, the small reflective moments in some of your work, they really do harken to some of that person's. Yeah, so one thing I wanted to mention was these wonderful works going on in your studio that we're fortunate enough to have a chance to see soon, after a little bit of question and answer. You had mentioned in the beginning that you had kind of confidently, or you were kind of leaving photographic resources, right? You were kind of going, you said, more emotionally and psychologically in the way you were handling your paintings and the structure. These to me seem so, even though they're small, they're so confident. And I think a lot of times when you leave those photographic references as a painter, you go through these stages of confidence because you're trying to learn to handle your medium, you know, more and more. And sometimes, you know, like when I was at Christie's, I saw this book of John Singer Sargent's watercolors. You know, I had to set it up, and I almost wanted to quit being an artist because it was pure confidence. It was like, but I see these in your works, in your studio. So was that something that you felt comfortable by the setting here, that you could venture out and do that, or?
I mean, it's just beautiful here, so that kind of allows for that type of looking, just because it's such a unique setting. I don't really usually paint plein air ever.
Right.
So this is like one of the first times that or like as a continuous thing that I've done it. But just the layout of the building, since it's so unlike others, and the geometric and like the more organic shapes involved, just makes that kind of looking a little bit more interesting.
I think I have one more. There's like such a vibrancy.
I don't know if I compare myself to Sargent though.
No. I mean, you know, you don't want to do that because it's, you know. No, but like, there's such a vibrancy to the colors in these, and like, you don't shy away from trying to capture these really little, like, profound moments, you know. Because my first experience of you when I first met you was you were out doing these. So is this something that you found, well, because of the space and because of the residency, that you kind of, this was a moment you were going to afford yourself, that you maybe didn't do that in the past? I'm just trying to figure that out, you know?
Yeah, and I think like with kind of moving away from photography, then you start seeing things in more, maybe abstract's not the right word, but like in,
You're interpreting
like
your,
yeah,
right.
you start grouping things in life, like how you would see a painting. Okay, then even if you're like, let's say it's this, you have to, your shirt's the same black as maybe similar black to this rectangle thing, but you have to decide which one you want to pay attention to. So maybe you're going to turn down, like maybe we'll make that less black, so then this, you're now the focus instead of like switching between these two.
Right,
and
right.
Those are those like quick decisions that plein air kind of allows you to do, because you kind of like, you know, they're small, and I mean, especially with like, this is usually in the morning, so the sun is moving pretty quickly, so you gotta get going. So you have to make decisions quickly about like what's grouping as like in the shadow versus what, you know, what you want to be the focus, where you want the composition. So there's like quicker decisions.
Right, right.
Instead of like, you know, the larger paintings kind of take a while, or like they go through a lot.
Right. That's why I was mentioning the confidence, because you really do have the confidence to know that your time frame is short. You have to work this out in a condensed period of time. In the studio, you can always revisit that. No one's gonna, you know, so it's, yeah, these are wonderful.
Thank you. I mean, they're not all successes.
Oh,
So
they're pretty
these
good.
are a better group than the other ones. The other ones were nice guys.
I'm gonna go
We'll
back.
critique them on the spot.
We're gonna critique these on, no, but,
Yeah, like this one, there's a blurriness and the geometric. The bottom, I was gonna say the bottom left, I think there's like a blurriness and an unsureness between the geometric and kind of the separation between light. There's like a little bit of a confusion to me.
you know what it is?
Like
It's,
the confusion.
no, but it's wonderful to see that kind of transition to thinking and embracing fully thinking as a painter, instead of like kind of applying this. It's almost like the comfort zone. Like I started out there too with some of my things of being like, oh, you rely on that photographic medium because,
Yeah.
but in here you're like, it's this totally different confidence level, totally different, you know. So I kind of, I'm happy that people are gonna get to see these in a couple minutes. So thank you again. You've been wonderful. Awesome.